Man, there were some real hashtag MMA fans moments for this last card, huh?
Oh yeah. Yeah, there always are. I mean, like whenever you get Yoel Romero on a card, you're gonna get some trash fire takes. Whenever somebody wrestles a beloved fan favorite, you're gonna get some trash fire takes. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much it wasn't quite the perfect storm. I think UFC 200 was probably the best because you had a brand new openly gay champion plus Brock Lesnar plus Misha Tate. So that was, whew, I mean, I think that one was the best. But plus Frankie Edgar losing a competitive decision.
Yeah. There was a small but strong contingent of Frankie Edgar fans for that event.
Yeah.
I'm becoming. I was getting mad online about people's reactions to these fucking fights yesterday, and
or just mad?
Oh, both actually. Slightly red, very mad, but definitely a bit of both at least. I was becoming MMA John Lennon. I was like coming up with personal parodies of Imagine, just picturing a better world. Like here, the best one went. Imagine all the keyboards with no keyboard warriors. Yeah. What a beautiful world it would be. Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Cyril Asker. With me is my co-host, as always, Dr. Patrick Wyman, and today we have quite a UFC pay-per-view to discuss. Was the card weak on paper? Absolutely. Were the matchups well made and therefore entertaining? As usual, yes, they were. In fact, this was a particularly strong night for action fights, and that does not exclude the main event. We're going to talk about the rest of what interested us from UFC 221, including the main event, the co-main, Matthews Lee, Israel Adesanya's electrifying UFC debut, and our dear friend Alexander Volkanovski, who put a beating on Jeremy Kennedy on the prelims. And at the end of today's show, we are going to spend a little time previewing next week's card, which is considerably less strong than this already kind of weak pay-per-view, but does have some enticing matchups on it to discuss, namely the main event of Cowboy Cerrone versus Yancy Medeiros. But before all of that, we are going to talk about the main event of UFC 221, Yoel Romero versus Luke Rockhold. Yoel Romero is now the proud holder, Pat, of the interim catchweight title. And truly, nothing will ever take that away from him.
The funny thing is, that's only slightly more nonsensical than the title for which he would have been fighting had he made weight. Which was,
precisely,
lest we forget, not the actual middleweight title. It was an interim title. But the actual middleweight title at this point is an interim title that because George St. Pierre, after beating Michael Bisping, vacated the actual middleweight title. So this would have been an interim. If we're looking at this in reality, it would have been an interim title.
Yeah.
While the lineal title is currently in the possession of one Georges St. Pierre.
Yes. So the lineage is broken. The lineage of the UFC middleweight championship is dead, and this was the promotion firing a few more bullets into its corpse.
Yes. That's essentially correct.
But the fight was quite a lot of fun. As we predicted, we said, boy, I sure wish this was Robert Whittaker. And thinking of it as an interim title fight only really reminds me of the matchup it could have been. And, of course, there is the recurring problem for the UFC that in knocking off Luke Rockhold, they have now set themselves up for another arguably less interesting fight for Robert Whittaker. There's just no way for them to build Robert Whittaker the way they are matching the rest of the middleweight division. But it was the number 1 and 2 middleweight contenders in the world fighting each other, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. What was your general take on the matchup, man?
I mean, I feel like you and I were among the very few who were hyper stoked for that matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a few different reasons for that, but I don't want to dwell on those. I think it's mostly because I think it delivered everything that you and I thought it was going to.
Absolutely, man. I loved it.
I thought it was a fantastic fight. I love matchups like this between kind of late prime veterans, like elite late prime veterans, because they have so much depth of skill that they're working with.
Yeah.
Romero at this point, he's 40, but he's been a pro for going on 9 years now. Rockhold has been a pro for 10, 11 years. Like, they're both physically still all there at this point. It seems fairly clear. But they've just put on more and more and more skills. And I think you saw in this fight, neither of them is quite like the wild man that they were at various points earlier in their careers. Yep. Like, Rockhold, when he fought Tim Kennedy, was throwing insane stuff. When he fought Vitor Belfort, he was throwing insane stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that was kind of like Rockhold was a really kind of a wildly aggressive fighter. And Romero, too, would do a lot of wild stuff earlier in his career. They're not really that guy anymore. Neither of them they're both much more measured, but they're much more themselves. Like, they've kind of settled into being the fighters that they're going to be. And the kind of fighters who know who they are, know what they're trying to do, have a lot of different tools to accomplish that, can make adjustments and reads on a moment-to-moment basis. That makes, from my perspective, for the most compelling kind of fight.
Hell yeah. Yeah, that I cannot disagree with any of that. It is not a reduced version of these two supremely athletic, dangerous, and well-rounded fighters. It was a focused version of both of them. It was the two of them at some of the most focused I've seen out of the two of them. And on that note, let's talk a little bit about Luke Rockhold in particular. There were two fights in this card, this and the co-main event, in which we said last week, somebody needed to do like one particular thing, that they really needed to be able to do this to have a chance here, or to prove that they were still moving forward. And for Curtis Blaydes, it was to counter with takedowns in the pocket. He was able to do that, and it won him the fight. For Luke Rockhold, I wanted to see him box. We talked very pointedly about his habit of sort of treating every single shot like it is a fully committed power shot, including the jab that, when it was countered, saw him knocked out by Michael Bisping, because he just committed to everything as if that was the only way to throw it. He did not do that in this fight. This was the best jabbing I have ever seen from Luke Rockhold. He made some serious strides in terms of his offensive boxing technique, and it really, really came down to the jab and how he was moving off of it, and the fact that he was not fully committing to it. He was using his punches the way punches, especially the jab, the way a jab is supposed to be used, and touching up his target, making it quick and unpredictable. There were periods in the third round when he began doubling and tripling the jab, and was having really, really good success against Yoel Romero. Unfortunately, Pat, the total boxing package has not really improved in the way that it needs to. And what I mean by that is Luke Rockhold still falls apart when he is on the retreat. The hands go down, the chin flies up, the eyes leave the opponent that is pursuing him. Everything really just falls apart when he is under pressure.
I would qualify that a little bit. Mm-hmm. I would say that I think under pressure, as long as he has a little bit of room, Rockhold still looks okay under pressure. He looks much better under pressure now than he used to. If he is, if he's like outside or inside, that black line around the center that goes around the perimeter of the cage, like a couple of different analysts call it the warning track. Mm-hmm. If he is close to the warning track, like on the inside of the warning track, then he's probably okay. But if he's within 3 steps of the fence, then he's in real trouble. And that's what Romero eventually figured out in this fight, was that he couldn't really, and didn't try to intelligently, try to rush Luke Rockhold in open space. He very kind of patiently worked his way into distance. He collapsed the range. He worked his way into boxing distance and figured out, okay, I just need to be patient. I kind of throw and I score. I throw and I score. I lull him into this kind of rhythm of a fight that is not especially dangerous for me, and I'm not going to get knocked out playing in this kind of fight. Mm-hmm. And then when I kind of lull him to sleep and he's lost track of where he is in the cage, then I rush. Then I push him back, his back hits the fence, and that's when I go. And he played with it. this was what I thought was the key to the fight, was going to be Romero's ability to play with rhythm and play with distance and just kind of read and just kind of react in the heat of the moment and mix things up and confuse Rockhold. And that, sure enough, I think is how the fight played out. That when it got into that kind of depth fight where you had to make reads and you had to try to change things up as the fight went on and you had to try to come up with a plan on the fly, then that's where Romero really shone here.
Yeah, this was an exhibition of Romero's intelligence, and he keyed in really quickly, I think, on the fact that, I mean, I will add a slight caveat of my own to your take on Rockhold's trouble when fighting near or against the fence. I will say that I think it doesn't take a whole lot from a determined opponent to get him to the fence because of the way he tends to retreat. You know, he tends to back up in these straight lines, and so there were a couple moments where Romero would just kind of feint. He would give like a very Tyron Woodley-esque sort of stutter step, and Rockhold would not really know what was coming, and so he would sort of instinctively retreat. And the moment he started to move backward, Romero would rush him, and Rockhold's the only response he knows under those circumstances is to try to backpedal faster. And so it didn't take long for him to run into the fence, even when he was in open space, whenever Romero decided to really commit to like an assault and come forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he knows what to do. He knows that he's supposed to take one step back, pivot, and then move. But he doesn't do it consistently. He does it about half the time.
It's a tall man's problem. Like, it really is. It's not... Luke Rockhold's not the first tall guy we've seen in MMA or in any other striking sport, for that matter, who kind of freaks out when people really just force their way past the end of his reach. We saw... I mean, John Jones turned his back and ran when he fought Rampage Jackson. Alexander Gustafsson does it all the time. And you can go all the way back to the turn of the damn century, the last one, and watch Jack Dempsey fight Jess Willard, who was like a full foot taller than him, but started to panic because Dempsey just forced his way inside. And in the same way that, like, we always talk about guys like Anthony Pettis who learn to rely on their athleticism until somebody rudely awakens them and shows them how many the finer details they've never bothered to pick up. It's often like that for tall guys. It's just like, until you get to the elite level, if you're a really good tall fighter, you don't fight a lot of guys who can consistently force their way inside and make you retreat. And so, like, Rockhold's bad habits on the retreat have become a huge problem only really at the tail end of his MMA career here.
The Anthony Pettis comparison, I think, is a really good one, because on the feet, I think Rockhold is a better version of Pettis. That's sure. Kind of as a fighter in general, I think if you're looking for a type, they're very, very similar. And I think it makes sense because they started fighting within, I think, a couple of months of each other in 2007. Mm-hmm. Like, they both had kind of this shocking athleticism, this length relative to most of the guys they were fighting, an outstanding kicking game, just speed and physical gifts, the likes of which their opponents didn't have. And then, Pettis, because he came up in Duke Rufus's gym, trended toward more like kind of flashy striking. Rockhold, because he came up at AKA and was already like a very good jiu-jitsu player before he ever had an MMA fight. Rockhold turns into this insane counter wrestler and clinch fighter and long range kicker. Mm-hmm. But like, time has not been kind to that particular archetype of fighter, in the same way that some of the same basic problems exist in Junior Dos Santos's game, who came up at roughly the same time. Like, Dos Santos started fighting again within 3 or 6 months of both of those guys. They never really learned what to do when opponents did not consent to their kind of fight.
Yes.
And Rockhold has done, I think, better than either of those other two guys of trying to figure out how to make that not the case. I think he's done a much better job than either of those guys of broadening out his game and really taking seriously the idea that he can do other things and should do other things. Mm-hmm. And that he's also got much broader skill sets to fall back on. Like, he's just a better fighter in terms of technical skill than either of those two dudes.
Yeah.
So
he just needs to learn to stand his damn ground. Like it's very difficult for him, obviously, because that's not his entire career has not prepared him for that kind of fighting. But honestly, take a cue. You take a cue from Nate Diaz against Conor McGregor. You know, you have somebody who is like pressing forward and beating you up, and you can't quite get their timing, and like cover up and don't move back. Sometimes let them smother their work, and then grab the clinch, maybe. Like, how helpful would it have been for Luke Rockhold to maybe be able to force the clinch on Yoel Romero a little bit more? Or in many of his fights, to be able to force the clinch on his opponent rather than waiting for them to rush into it, often now after dinging him on the chin first. It's just, but, you know, credit to, we should pivot and talk about Romero too, because Romero, I thought, did a phenomenal job of dealing with Rockhold, and where I thought he was going to fight a more like a slower pace, sort of draw Rockhold in. The rhythm changes we talked about were still key. The counters in the pocket were still very, very key. The difference that I didn't expect is how much pressure he put on Luke Rockhold. And in retrospect, it's hard to say that wasn't exactly the right choice to make, because Rockhold doesn't like being pressured. And Romero chose a style of fighting that basically meant he never had to leave range. He never had to take a step back. He did a lot of weird, like, cross-arm guard blocking, which I didn't love, but didn't really it worked pretty well, because Rockhold, partly because of his height, wasn't really comfortable going to the body. And so Romero was just, like, picking off shots with his hands. He was slipping and countering, same-time counters as he came forward. All of these different ways to defend the improved boxing of Rockhold in boxing range, but none of which required him to take a step back to defend himself. And so, like, Rockhold just never got a break. Even when Romero was working at a slow pace, he was always there, ready to do something.
Yeah, I was really impressed by Romero's boxing, because for years, one of the things they used to sell Romero was like, oh, you know, his brother is like an actual legit elite cruiserweight boxer. Like he held a title for a very long time. His brother did. And so, you know, and Romero, that he had these boxing chops. This was what we were told. And then they kind of stopped mentioning it, because you started to see flying knee finishes from him and kicks and then his wrestling reappeared, and people would talk about his athleticism. And so people stopped talking about the fact that the idea that he had these boxing chops that really had not shown themselves off in any sort of meaningful way in his fights. And then this fight comes along and you're like, oh, holy shit. No, they weren't lying about that. Like, they probably did know how to do a lot of that stuff all along. And for a variety of better and worse reasons, chose not to do that. Like, I think the kind of fight he fought here, he could have done that a long time ago. He could have done that a lot of different times against a lot of different fighters. And for reasons that only maybe make sense within Yoel Romero's head, he did not do that. But now in this fight, where he's like, okay, I don't want to be at long kicking range, I think he figured out very quickly that maybe he thought going into this fight that he could be a little further out, that he could be at kicking range, that he would be able to shoot the occasional takedown, that he could explode from a long way away and get to Rockhold. What became clear to him very quickly, I think, was that wasn't the case, was that if he stayed outside of kicking range, he might check some kicks. He could land some really good kicks of his own, but eventually that range did not suit him. That maybe Rockhold was faster than he thought he was. That if he gave Rockhold that much space, then Rockhold was going to be able to pivot and get out of range. That Rockhold's going backwards footwork and sense of distance was not so bad that Romero could just bum rush him from anywhere.
Yeah, right? And that may have been informed by the fact that he hurt his leg very shortly into the first round because of Rockhold's kicks.
Exactly.
As far as I can tell, there was like a shin-to-shin moment on the second kick Rockhold threw, and that is because Romero said his shin was injured. Fortunately, it turns out it's not broken, but he was limping on it. There was clearly something wrong with it, and but it's hard to argue with the adjustment he made as a result. Like, it was a perfect choice, man. And you look at the decisions that Yoel Romero has made that are perfectly tailored to the opponents he's fighting throughout his career, like more and more as it goes on, Yoel Romero, you have to celebrate his fight IQ almost more than anything. The man is just, he knows how to fight each person specifically. I mean, look at the man's resume now. Like Luke Rockhold, Chris Weidman, Jacare, Lyoto Machida, Tim Kennedy, Brad Tavares, Derek Brunson. Those are his last 7 or 8 fights, and then a loss to Robert Whittaker in there. Like, that's an incredible array of opponents.
Yeah, I mean, and he was, if a couple of things had gone differently in that last round, he was very close to beating Whittaker.
Yeah.
That was an extremely close fight. Like, I think maybe because I was there for that one, it seemed closer than it actually was, but I don't think so. I think it actually was just really incredibly close until the very, very end of the fight.
It was quite close there, and there were moments where Romero just like resolved to just counter in the pocket and throw bombs, and some of them got through. Like a little better luck, a little better timing, Whittaker might have gotten hurt and lost that fight.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's very strange that of everything that's happened in the middleweight division since Anderson Silva fell. Right. Chris Weidman was supposed to be the next big thing. He was Anderson Silva's designated successor.
Right.
Right. He beats him twice. He beats Machida. And then what happens? Oh, he beats Vitor Belfort. So he defends the title 3 times. And you think this is going to be the guy. This is going to be our new long-term champion. And then Rockhold just murders him. Okay. Well, now Rockhold's the guy. Wait. Okay, Michael Bisping knocks him out. Then, okay, well, Bisping isn't going to hold the title for long, and he just he beats Dan Henderson. Then he loses to GSP. We get an interim title. Before that, we get an interim title fight between Romero and Whittaker. Like the guys that it was supposed to be in this division were Weidman and Rockhold. And as it's turning out, it's neither of those dudes. It's turning out to be Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero.
Right.
Romero has maybe, despite the wins that Weidman strung together there, Romero might actually have the most impressive resume of any elite fighter at middleweight.
I think he does. He has middleweight's current best resume, in terms of like who is still an elite fighter on his resume. Obviously, if you go back in time, I don't think he outmatches like the long tenured career of Anderson Silva, but of current elite ranked fighters, it is very hard to argue with the names on Romero's record.
I mean, he's basically, and the way that he's beaten them too. Yeah. It's not just that he's beaten them; it's that Chris Weidman's head came clean off. Like he pounded Lyoto Machida's face through the canvas. Like he hit the uppercut that he hit Rockhold with against the fence made a sound like a flying knee. I've never seen, I don't think, a punch that hard. That was harder than the punch that Francis Ngannou nearly killed Alistair Overeem with. Like,
I mean, that if you are a top 10 middleweight and your name is not Robert Whittaker, fear the 3rd round when you're fighting Yoel Romero, because he has just, I mean, it's hard to argue with results, Pat. He just executes elite middleweights in the 3rd round every single time. I still struggle to really explain it. But you can look for those key choices that Romero makes and how he adapts to his opponents, how he chooses to approach them. For a fighter who seems to have so many options just physically available to him, he pairs them down expertly and just chooses the right way to fight. And I thought this was a brilliant example of that. The lovely little double jab he used to set that left hand. I mean, this was boxing Romero, and that was enough to beat boxing Rockhold.
It's crazy that his footwork, his tight, precise footwork, was that good with an injured shin.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if anybody has ever had like a severe bone bruise or a contusion on their shin. It is incredibly painful, and it makes it exceptionally difficult to do anything. Like I know people who have had both, and they say it's actually worse than like an MCL tear, because an MCL tear just kind of makes your knee unstable, which is very difficult to deal with. Like don't get me wrong, but like an injured shin, the sheer pain every time you put pressure on it, you put weight down on it, makes it extremely difficult to do the kinds of unconscious things that you have to do just in terms of movement in a fight. Like you kind of have to stop and think about things because it hurts real bad. I don't know. I mean, I thought this was a pretty stunning performance from Romero, and it really encapsulates everything that we've been saying about him for a while. I think this performance made obvious the kinds of things that we've been trying to point to and struggling sometimes to really get across about what makes him so good.
For sure. We're going to have to talk about Blaydes Hunt in the next segment and I'm not bothered about this because this is a fascinating matchup and it's fun to talk about. But let's wrap it up by talking about what's next for these two guys very briefly. personally for me, Luke Rockhold needs to go to light heavyweight. I think there's no way that, like, what is someone like John Vellante going to hit him harder than Yoel Romero just did? No. You know, like, he's going to go up there and fight a relatively weaker, slower crop of opponents who are, most of them, still substantially smaller than him. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the vast amount of weight Luke Rockhold has clearly been cutting for so many years probably has something to do with what seems like a suspect chin. So I would really like to see him go to 205. I think there's a lot of favorable matchups for him there. And I want to see him, you know, like, go up there and maybe take it easy for a fight or two. I know that pretty much never happens with UFC fighters, but the man is clearly making genuine improvements. He had a growing pain moment when he fought David Branch and another one here, but the improvements are beginning to materialize. I want to see them able to come out. I want to see Luke Rockhold have a brilliant late career at 205.
Yeah, I mean, is there any question to you, if you put him in there with somebody like Corey Anderson or Ilir Latifi or Misha Serkinov, that Rockhold wins those fights?
No, absolutely not.
Like, I could not possibly more strongly pick Rockhold over any of those guys.
Yeah. Honestly, like, what top five, because middleweight and light heavyweight are just the same damn division, where it's like a bunch of chaff, and then there is truly amazing elite talent in, like, the top three. And so I honestly, like, most of the top five middleweights could probably also be top five light heavyweights if all the top five light heavyweights retired on one day.
Romero, if he decides he doesn't want to cut weight anymore, is still a top three light heavyweight.
Sure. Yeah. Who the hell's going to stop him other than guys like Jones and Cormier, you know?
There's no question in my mind. Like, he knocks out Glover Teixeira. I think he probably knocks out Volkan Oezdemir. I think he probably knocks out Jimmy Manuwa. Like, I think Romero, the only guys in that division I could see Romero having a lot of trouble with are, like, Alexander Gustafsson, and I think I still might pick Romero over Gustafsson.
Maybe.
I think I would. I think I'd pick him over Gustafsson.
I don't know. That one's kind of dicey for me, but either way, like, it makes especially good sense for Luke Rockhold. I think he would probably see his chin feel a little improved. He would probably have more consistent energy in his fights, and he would face a similar level of opposition with a similar frame advantage. Like, there's just no reason for him to take this as the opportunity to finally make that trip. As for Yoel Romero, he's probably going to rematch Robert Whittaker. I guess the weight thing is not being seen as much of an issue. I don't personally see it as much of an issue either. I didn't anticipate Romero missing weight, but as he pointed out after the event, it's the first time it's ever happened, and it's because he accepted a fight that was 2 weeks earlier than the one he was originally scheduled to take. So, you know, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, that dude is probably walking around at 215 or 220, and he knows how to cut weight. This is I wouldn't.
I mean, people were saying, like, it kind of sucks for Rockhold because he could have. I mean, he would have gotten a lot of hatred from fans, but he could have passed this fight up and probably still gotten his title shot. So it really sucks. But was there, like, a weight advantage for Yoel Romero that had an impact in this fight? Rockhold was still clearly the visibly bigger man. Rockhold is huge for this division. He must fight at over 200 pounds, like 210 at least, when he fights. He's huge. So
yeah,
I'm not too bothered about the weight miss. It is what it is. Thank you, Max Holloway, for that insightful analysis. And why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, we're going to move on to the co-main event. Curtis Blaydes defeated Mark Hunt, saddened a lot of people, made me happy. Not for Mark Hunt's loss, but to see Curtis Blaydes moving up in the world and in the UFC's heavyweight division. That after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. It's me, Cyril Asker again. Pat, let's talk about Curtis Blaydes and Mark Hunt.
I thought you were going to, I heard you say that, and then I thought you were going to call back to it at some point, and you never did. So I'm excited that you've just let it stand now for 2 segments here.
Yeah, I shouldn't have even mentioned it again. I should have just let it be one of those delightful. This is the lesson for me as a podcast host, is learning not to enjoy my own jokes and to just deadpan them and let people experience them as they should be experienced. So I fucked up. We're gonna edit all of this out. So welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's talk about Curtis Blaydes versus Mark Hunt. People were really down on Curtis Blaydes for this performance, Pat, and it kind of pissed me off because people, first of all, people were saying that he was like a coward for not standing with Mark Hunt. They were using words like pussy and stuff like that. A lot of that on Twitter. But just the mere idea that you would watch Curtis Blaydes, an explosive, powerful takedown artist who hit 10 takedowns on Mark Hunt. That is more than anyone else in the UFC has ever hit on Mark Hunt. And you would watch that happening and say, this is boring. That tells me you don't like MMA. You might like sloppy kickboxing, but that is the kind of wrestling anyone should be able to appreciate. It's not like the man was playing a stalling game. You know what I mean? He was trying to do damage on the ground. He was hitting sick mat returns and high amplitude takedowns, the likes of which you very rarely see when both competitors weigh upwards of 260 pounds. So I don't know. I found this to be a really impressive performance from Curtis Blaydes. And to me, based on the stuff we were saying, we hoped to someday see out of him on last week's episode, a sort of coming-of-age performance where he really had to face up to adversity, use the tools that work for him, and beat an elite heavyweight. I was really impressed.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty objectively impressive performance from Blaydes because Hunt did not look bad. I did not think. I think Hunt looked like a better version of himself than he did when he fought Brock Lesnar when faced with very similar kinds of challenges.
Yeah.
I thought that he had a better game plan. I thought that he did a better job of putting himself in position to win. But what really stood out to me here was not Blaydes' wrestling so much as how he got there in the first place. Like Blaydes, I think Blaydes thought, okay, I'm going to test this guy on the feet a little bit. He did what I referred to last week as the Corey Anderson striking thing, where he just threw out a bunch of volume.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, I'm going to throw my jab, double up the jab, okay, jab cross, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all that did was give Hunt the information that he needed to read Blaydes' range and his timing and then counter him, which is how Blaydes got himself in huge trouble.
Yes.
Right? So what Blaydes figured out after that was, okay, this isn't working. He's going to try to counter me when I throw. So what I need to do, this doesn't mean that I need to stop throwing. What it means is that I need to figure out what I can do once I've drawn out the counter that is not standing in the pocket and exchanging, which is how I'm going to lose the fight.
Right.
So Blaydes' adjustment was to figure out how to draw out Hunt's counter and find a bunch of different ways of doing that, and then to use that as an opportunity to get in on his takedowns, because he wasn't going to have any success shooting from way too far outside. He knew that. What he needed was to figure out how to get there, and he did that brilliantly. He did an amazing job of that. That was some really high-level fight IQ.
Yeah, absolutely, and presence of mind as well. I mean, the quality of Curtis Blaydes' chin stands out because the man, Francis Ngannou couldn't finish him. He closed his eye, but he could not knock Curtis Blaydes out. And Mark Hunt landed a life ender on Curtis Blaydes in the first round of this fight. He landed an overhand right cross counter that would have felled the vast majority of UFC heavyweights. A devastating shot. The problem for Curtis Blaydes is that he still doesn't seem to, despite the fact that he's got a great frame and knew that he needed to use that reach advantage and be like an all the way in, all the way out kind of fighter against Hunt, he doesn't seem to have a great idea of what his range really is yet. So that's, I think, what kind of leads to a lot of that guesswork when he's throwing those punches out there. But the presence he had after being knocked down, not twice, hurt badly once, stunned again with a follow-up, and then knocked down with a third follow-up, to feint out a reaction and hit a reactive takedown as Hunt was going for the kill. I mean, the first takedown Curtis Blaydes got was not a panic wrestler shot. He was hurt. He was doing his best to recover. He feinted. Hunt swung, and Blaydes dipped under and hit him. Only after Hunt reacted to the feint did Blaydes actually commit to the takedown. Which, when we talked about this fight last week, we were both thinking of the Daniel Omielanchuk fight and how much trouble Blaydes had in being comfortable enough in the pocket and comfortable enough letting his opponent throw to time those throws from close enough range to finish a takedown. This was like an exhibition in how much he had improved that aspect of his game. He did that all night after that first takedown, and big slams, nice work from the body lock, and pretty strong control as well. Like Blaydes is going to be a problem for a lot of heavyweights because he seems to have exceptionally good conditioning. He can fight at a great pace. That conditioning probably helps with how durable he is. And he is still improving rapidly. Like, even though he was easily timed by Mark Hunt, he knew what to do with that result. And he also, he was getting off some jabs and stuff like that. Compare this Curtis Blaydes to the one who fought Francis Ngannou. There's a massive difference in comfort on the feet. And especially in comfort in knowing what you're supposed to do as an elite wrestler with your striking game. So, no complaints from me, man. I thought this was a coming-of-age performance for Curtis Blaydes. Yeah.
He's only been a pro for 4 years.
Right.
Like, this dude is probably 2 years away from what I would consider to be his actual real prime.
Sure.
Like, he has made tremendous strides and is as promising a prospect as there is in this division. If he fought Ngannou again tomorrow, I might pick him over Ngannou. And I might have said that even before we saw what happened against Stipe Miocic with Ngannou. You know, like, this dude is super, super fucking talented, and coming along exactly as you would hope that he's coming along. Like, there is a lot to like about him as a prospect. And in fact, I mean, I think he's as good a contender as any to eventually hold the title in this division.
The unfortunate thing is that he won't get a step back now, even though I think he still needs a little time. They're probably going to put him in there against another top 5 heavyweight. Personally, I would really like to see Curtis Blaydes fight like a Timothy Johnson. I know that's not a matchup that excites anyone, but I want to see him fight somebody who can stop his takedowns, at least in the first round, can stuff those shots, and will force him to show off some of his striking, get more of a feel for that part of the game, without really being at much of a risk of being caught with another, potential chin ruiner like the one that Hunt landed. But,
see, I don't think Johnson would have anything for him. I think he could get takedowns on Johnson right away. Like, yeah, I think he's that good a wrestler.
Yeah, the thing is that there aren't many elite wrestlers at heavyweight, is what.
But that's why I'd like to see him fight the Verdum Volkov winner. I think that Verdum would be a really interesting matchup for him. Somebody who's really crafty on the feet and who could genuinely make him pay on the ground in any sort of scramble type situation.
That's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see him already fighting elite all-time great heavyweights who can make him pay anywhere, Do
you think a soon-to-be 41-year-old, he would be, assuming he beats Volkov, he would be 41 when they fought. Like, a 41-year-old Verdum, very much kind of on the downswing of his career. You don't think that would be the right kind of matchup for Blaydes?
I don't know. I mean, Verdum he's still chugging along, I think. I think he's still got a few really impressive performances left in him.
We'll know more after the Volkov fight, but
true.
Or how about Tybura, the Tybura Lewis winner?
Yeah. Heavyweight sucks, doesn't it?
It's not good. It's not ideal.
That's the thing. Like, I sympathize with the UFC's plight here because there aren't many options for how to match a really outstanding up-and-comer like Curtis Blaydes.
Like, this is kind of a brief aside, but what the UFC actually needs to do to solve their roster problems at this point is to buy Bellator. But they can't do that because of the ongoing antitrust suit and the current investigations and whispers about, are they a monopoly?
And probably also how much money they just spent on the UFC itself.
You could have, like, in the context of the money that they've spent, you could get Bellator for effectively nothing.
Okay, yeah,
like,
that's true.
what you would be buying at this point would be the value of the contracts, but they need the name value. You know, they need guys like Ryan Bader and Phil Davis and, you know, whoever's filling out Bellator's heavyweight division and like a name welterweight or two. Like they just need 20 fighters who have some name value to slot in, because like in hindsight, that was the Strikeforce roster. Buying Strikeforce is what saved them when they initially expanded and they had to get some more name value in there. Buying Strikeforce gave them that ready made.
The fantastic main event that we just surprised ourselves by spending an entire segment discussing, those are Strikeforce fighters. Yep. Yeah, that shit revitalized the UFC in ways that we're only now beginning to realize. I agree. But, one final thing about this matchup, by the way. Mark Hunt is not easy to take down. You fucking dopes. People online, ooh, Mark Hunt gets out-wrestled. He can't stop a takedown to save his... Mark Hunt's takedown is 60... His takedown defense is 68%. Here are the names of people since Mark Hunt learned to stop a takedown. Because, yes, early in his career, Vanderlei Silva hit 7 takedowns on him. All right? Since Mark Hunt learned to stop a shot in like 2011, he's had like 13 fights since then. Here are the names of people who've been able to take him down more than once in all 13 of those fights. Brock Lesnar, Stipe Miocic, and now Curtis Blaydes, who hit more than any of them. So shut the fuck up. Mark Hunt is not easy to take down. He's certainly not easy to hold down. There may be a dearth of elite wrestlers in the heavyweight division, but don't take that away from Curtis Blaydes, all right? He did phenomenally well out wrestling a guy that most heavyweights have a really hard time doing that to.
Yeah. Guys, take it easy. Connor will not have you being angry and demeaning toward his large son, Curtis Blaydes.
Yeah. Don't talk shit about my sweet boy and his very impressive effort, okay? Some of those freeze frames of some of those slams are going to be on this refrigerator for a long time. So I'm still proud of him. Anyway, let's quickly run through the rest of this. Matthews versus Lee was the performance or the fight of the night. Jake Matthews might be taken like that weird sort of Sage Northcutt route where there was a lot of expectation placed on him at the start. He sort of fell short and then continued to fall short until we were kind of convinced that maybe he wasn't going to turn the corner. And then he has what I thought was a really impressive performance here against Li Jingliang, where, I don't know, it was like a sort of Romero-esque, where he really just managed his energy very well, used his natural talents, his explosiveness, his speed, and kind of limited the exchanges to ones that there were only exchanges on his terms for the most part. And when it was Li Jingliang trying to walk him down, trying to get it back, Matthews just kind of avoided him until he could lace him with another big shot or put him on his back again. I thought this was a very smart performance from a Jake Matthews who looks now twice as big as I remember him looking when he made his UFC debut. The man has doubled in size.
He is fucking enormous.
Right.
He's gonna end up a middleweight by the time his career is over.
Yeah, he looks like a I don't know, like who else has a build like that? Like a Tim Kennedy. Like he's just got a very thick upper body that he did not have. I mean, he's young, so it makes sense, but kind of surprised at how much he's filling out.
Yeah, he is a sizable lad at this point.
Absolute unit.
An absolute unit, that boy. I was really impressed by him because it seemed to me that aside from the technical improvements that we saw in his boxing and his shot selection, his head movement looked way better. The key was that he is learning to move not in big explosive steps. He's learning to take small steps. He can still hit those huge explosive movements when he needs to, but he knows now that he doesn't have to move that way. Mm-hmm. That you can cover distance in a couple of small shuffling steps from time to time. You can take one or two small steps back and then pivot out. It doesn't have to be big linear explosive movements all the time. That to me was the key to this. And that's really what I've been waiting to see from him for a long time.
Yeah. And indeed, a la Yoel Romero in the main event, those small steps tend to make the big explosive steps more effective. You put yourself in position to really explode with meaning. You make it so that the speed of your explosion is really, really at odds with the seeming, methodical pace that you're normally moving around with. So
yeah, the next thing that I would look for Matthews to learn is how to manipulate his rhythm a little bit more, because he learned to, in this fight, we saw him learning to mix up the depth, the range, and how far he was stepping, and short steps versus long steps, and taking some angles every now and again. When he learns to take a little off his fastball and kind of mix up the speeds a little bit more, that's when I think he could be really, really devastating, because he's so fast when he really gets into it, that like throwing some half speed stuff every now and again is going to make his quick stuff look even faster. Just like you pointed out. I mean, I think that's what I would look for from him. But he's a talented guy, man, in this division with a lot of dudes who are kind of aging out of the elite. He could be a really good fighter. He's taken kind of a long and circuitous route to get there, but he's been in the UFC already for almost 4 years. Like, he's picked up a lot of experience, but the talent is there. The talent has never been in question. It's like kind of been his development curve and what's he going to look like physically. So, but this was promising. This was a promising performance.
Absolutely. How about Israel Adesanya? He pissed all over that cage, and Rob Wilkinson with it. Yeah. Really dazzling showing of striking. I mean, it is rare in MMA that we get a reminder of what elite striking looks like in comparison to typical MMA striking, because we just don't get many elite strikers from other disciplines coming into MMA. There's rarely a reason or a desire to do so from those people, but this was a reminder of what like distance management, of what a real tight understanding of one's range, of what perfect control of your own strikes, of how much power you put into them. I don't know. Everything was so nicely put together for Israel Adesanya. I'm not convinced by this performance that he's going to be a phenomenally successful mixed martial artist. There were certainly things that other MMA fighters can't do, but he also spent a good portion of the bout being controlled by Rob Wilkinson's wrestling, even as he was very difficult to take down. That's not a great look. But when he was on the offensive, like, holy shit, he was measuring and lining up shots and putting them together and changing targets with such deftness that it was like I was suddenly watching a different sport.
Well, people were comparing. I was really kind of shocked by the extent to which people were doing this. They're like, oh, he looks like John Jones. He's way fucking better a striker than John Jones ever will be. Like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
I was shocked by this. Does that mean that he can be as good, as effective at the elite levels as John Jones is? No, that's not what that means.
Right.
But as a striker, Israel Adesanya has forgotten more about striking than John Jones will ever learn.
Yeah, that much is clear.
What you pointed to with his back on the cage is something he's going to have to work on, because otherwise better fighters than Rob Wilkinson will stick him there and be able to actually do something with it. Mm-hmm. It's developing not so much the skills as the sense of urgency. Like, he needs to learn, okay, I dig an underhook, now I push off, I create space, and I get back to what I do. Mm-hmm. It's not just knowing the technique there. It's the sense of urgency in doing it and being able to pick your moment and say, okay, now I have to go. Which, Adesanya, that's not the same thing as kind of panicking, because I was heartened that when he was stuck in that position with a big, strong middleweight, Adesanya didn't panic. No. Like, he didn't think, okay, what do I do now? He knew kind of what he needed to do. He knew how to avoid getting worked over in those situations. It's not like Wilkinson got anything done there.
No. It was like when someone tries to take Shane Burgos down. He kind of just chilled, waited it out.
Yeah. But the thing that you have to do if you're Adesanya is to learn that Wilkinson couldn't, but there are guys in that division, say, I'll give you an example. Krzysztof Jotko, who is like nowhere near as good a striker as Israel Adesanya is not the world's best wrestler, but Krzysztof Jotko, if you let him, will just pin his head against your chin and hold you against the fence for 15 minutes, if that's what it takes to get a win. That division is full of guys who can and will do that. So, like, much better than Rob Wilkinson. So when you get an opportunity, and Wilkinson gave him opportunities to get free, it's not enough to just defend it. You have to be proactive and get back to open space.
Yeah, and maybe that is an outgrowth of some of the... I mean, Adesanya does walk kind of a narrow line with his striking style, where he does sort of have this like sleepy ease about how he responds to strikes sometimes where there isn't a ton of urgency, is part of what makes him so effective, because it's like the fight that the strike that shocks you on the counter, or the pot shot that seems to come out of nowhere. It really does surprise you because he's just got this really easy grace about him, walking around, knowing he's out of range, leaning away from kicks and punches. But that doesn't really that doesn't work in grappling the same way it does in striking, because if the strikes aren't landing, then the other guy's not getting anything done. Whereas if the takedowns aren't being finished, the wrestler is still getting something done by controlling you. Just defending is not a great look for scoring as far as MMA is concerned. So that's going to be part of the learning process. I do want to point out, well, two things I want to point out. I didn't realize his nickname was The Last Stylebender, which is about 1,000,000 times worse than just the Stylebender, which is kind of a cool nickname. The Last Stylebender. You had to go with like a kid's cartoon show reference for your nickname, Israel. Come on, buddy. The second thing, I loved Adesanya's sticky hands. That's the term I've come up with for this. I don't know what other people call it, but I always notice this when, say, like a lot of fighters do this, but Floyd Mayweather does it particularly well, where he will hit whether a shot lands or misses, he will often leave that hand out there and like attach it to the target, which is why I call it sticky hands. Say you land a left hook, the guy's head ducks down to avoid whatever's coming back. Instead of firing right away, since your left hook just hit him, you just extend that hand, touch him, so that you're kind of holding him in place. You know exactly where he is because you can feel the distance, and you're kind of covering his vision so you can line him up for the right hand to follow up. Adesanya did that so well with both hands when he had Wilkinson shelled up against the fence. He would hit him and not immediately withdraw, but use the strike to control and create the position for the follow-up. And I love that kind of shit. You do not see that very often in MMA, if ever.
Yeah, that's what elite high-level striking looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so last thing to talk about. We'll do this one very briefly. Our boy, Alexander Volkanovski, put a terrible, terrible beating on Jeremy Kennedy. Jeremy Kennedy's strong wrestling was not nearly enough to counter the ceaseless momentum of Volkanovski's style. He stayed on him from the beginning. He beat the shit out of him on the ground. And when Kennedy thought he might be able to adjust, Volkanovski adjusted to that and beat the shit out of him twice as bad. What did you think?
Volkanovski's really fucking good, is what I thought. I think he is going to be a nightmarish matchup for a lot of guys at the top of this division, because there's a lot of things that we've talked about with regard to his game before. We've given Volkanovski a lot of deserved attention, I think, because it's easy to look at the things that he does and be like, oh, he's a good wrestler. He's a really dangerous ground and pound artist. He knows how to pressure. He's extremely physically strong. Like that's very clear. He's a good athlete. But none of that stuff would matter if he weren't constantly making the right decisions. With everything that he does, he's always choosing. When presented with one of 3 or 4 or 8 different options, he is always picking the right one. That's such a rare talent to have. That's such a rare gift to have. And you could see him do this when he pinned Kennedy against the fence the first time. And he's like, okay, I've got him in this particular position. I've got a strong head position here. I've got an underhook. What do I do now? Okay, I can try to reap his leg and hit a trip. I can throw a knee here. I can move here. I can take my head away and replace it with an elbow. He runs through this list mentally in the flash of an instant. And you see Kennedy trying to think, okay, what's he going to do to me? And the second Kennedy starts to think, what's he going to do to me? Volkanovski hits the trip and gets him down, right? Like he goes knee to trip to elbow. Like all of these options blend together into this seamless kind of whole that's impossible for opponents to figure out how to deal with. Like the only way to defeat that game is to not get there in the first place. And Volkanovski, as it turns out, is really, really good at getting you there in the first place. Like his pressure footwork is good. He knows how to cut off your movement. He knows how to walk you into strikes. He appears to be a hard puncher. So if you fuck up with your back to the fence, you're going to eat a really, really hard shot, and then you're probably going to get taken down right after that.
Mm-hmm. He is one of the best examples of like elite pressure fighting I think we have seen in MMA. Just the way that I'm not saying he's the best technician or the most effective pressure fighter necessarily that we've ever seen in MMA, but that how his game is designed around pressure is brilliant and succinct. It's not overcomplicated. Like you said, like it's like simple choices that just kind of stem off of this flowchart of how he fights. It's like he got that outside trip on Kennedy in the first round, first takedown of the fight. And he got there because he put Kennedy in a position where he couldn't defend the trip. It's like head pressure under your chin. Okay, now you're standing up tall. Now you're wondering what's next. Now I take you down. Now you're reacting to this. Now I frame on your chest. Now I hit you. Now you react to the frame. Okay, now I frame with the other arm. Now you know what I mean? Like there is always a reaction because he's always doing something. He's always doing something that is designed to make you panic, to make you react, to make you move this way or that. And then he is always instantly ready to capitalize with the next step in that progression. I just love watching it, man.
Yeah, it's really, really, really good because at the end of the day, it's much less about what skill sets does he possess. Though his skill sets are fine. Like it's not like you point to some hole or flaw in the things that he knows how to do. It's that the reasoning behind why he's doing this or that at any given time it could not possibly be clearer. Right?
Yeah.
Like you can see the thought process and it's the right thought process basically every time. So, I mean, I think he's probably ready for a guy in the top 15. There are some intriguing matchups for him. I think he's ready to move up and see if this is going to work against the elite of the division. I don't see any particular reason to think that it won't.
For sure. Yeah. It is the sum of the parts is pretty impressive, but the whole is still greater in Alexander Volkanovski's case. And he is probably, if you need to introduce somebody to like what MMA is on just a concept level, show them Alexander Volkanovski. Show them this fight and say, this is how MMA is different from every other combat sport. Because this is like a guy who uses every aspect of MMA to his advantage. So Volkanovski, ready for that step up. Hard to disagree with that. But that is all for UFC 221. Let's take one more break, and when we return, we will come back to preview Cowboy versus Medeiros and some of the other fights, the other highlights of the not-so-highlight-riddled card coming up next week. What are they calling this one? Cowboy versus Medeiros, UFC Austin. Well, after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about UFC Austin, which I'm very excited about. Donald Cerrone is fighting Yancy Medeiros in a main event that, I don't know, Pat. How do you feel about this one? We've been spending a lot of our time lately complaining about the lack of narrative on it, so I don't want to really necessarily go down that rabbit hole, but general vibe about this main event, is it as lackluster to you as it is to me?
I understand why the fight was made. I think it will probably be fine, but it doesn't. Does this resonate through the long-time halls of MMA in any meaningful way? No, not really. It's a fight. And it's not a bad fight. It's a perfectly fine headlining fight for this card, I think. If you were desperately trying to suck a narrative out of it, you would say, this is Yancy Medeiros' chance to assert himself as an elite welterweight. And this is Donald Cerrone's chance to put himself back on track after 3 consecutive losses. At this point, do either of those narratives seem especially like compelling to me? No, not especially. If they are compelling to you, more power to you. So yeah, okay, cool. But the fight itself is fine. I'm actually pretty interested in the fight itself because Medeiros, whom I don't know that we've ever actually talked about in any sort of depth on this show, despite him being in the UFC for 5 years. It's almost 6 years.
Yeah, I think we may have briefly argued about whether or not he beat John McDessie back in the day.
That is correct.
But yes, we have not spent that much time on Medeiros. We talked briefly, too, about his fight with Cowboy, which had to be talked about. We talked, too, about him being on the receiving end of Francisco Trinaldo's onslaught. but featuring Medeiros. I don't think we've ever really done that. And weirdly enough, from my perspective, these guys are weirdly similar in a lot of ways. Like, neither one's all that comfortable being pushed back and being made to counter. Neither is a particularly fast starter. And both guys just, it's like, Medeiros is like if a very similar genetic makeup to Donald Cerrone. If you just took Donald Cerrone's embryo and transported it to Hawaii and then introduced it to the Diaz brothers. So instead of like weird American Muay Thai, he decided to go into boxing. That's kind of what he would look like, I think.
Yeah, it's Medeiros is a fun fighter and an interesting fighter.
No doubt.
He reminds me a lot of kind of an earlier career Nate Diaz, but with heavier hands and much less compelling jiu-jitsu. But a very similar kind of game where like he's much more comfortable moving forward than he is fighting off his back foot. He's exceptionally vulnerable to kicks, horrendous defensively. Like if you can get through his reach and his length, he is just there to be hit over and over and over and over again. But he's got real snap to his punches. He's got way more snap than an early career Nate Diaz did. He's a much more dangerous counterpuncher than an early career Nate Diaz was. Though Nate at this point is fine working off his back foot. He can stick and move and be just fine doing that. Medeiros, not quite so much. So for Cerrone, it seems like the game plan here is fairly clear. You want to stay off the end. You want to stay out of the pocket. You want to stay probably out of the clinch, at least early. And you want to just kick the shit out of Medeiros' legs and body.
Yeah, pretty much. Medeiros' reaction to things defensively is like the worst version of what Luke Rockhold has, where it's like he does react and reacts suddenly, but it's not really to anything specific that he's seeing. He more reacts to the idea of an attack coming his way. And so he's really easy to surprise with all kinds of things, but especially the kicks, because he really zeroes in on this boxing attack. The Oliveira had great success just throwing undisguised, unset up kicks to Medeiros' body. That seems like a pretty gross, a pretty drastic. What's the word I'm looking for? A pretty drastic flaw to have against Donald Cerrone. But what's Donald Cerrone looking like nowadays? Where is he? It's only been 4 months or so since the loss to Darren Till. So what's going on in Donald Cerrone's head right now, and where is he at physically? I don't really know.
That Till loss was real worrisome to me because it looked like a regression.
Yes.
It looked like he had come up with all of these interesting and compelling ways of dealing with guys who tried to get in his face when he had fought over the last couple of years of his career in his kind of welterweight resurgence. It's not like guys stopped pressuring him. It's that Cerrone did a much better job of dealing with it when guys did come after him. His footwork looked better. He did a much better job of extending and pushing his hip into his punches, like really turning his hip over, which lengthened his reach. It made it harder to get inside on him in the first place. He would change levels. He would counter in the pocket and exchange when he needed to. All of that disappeared against Till, and he looked exactly like the dude who got walked down over and over and over again in his earlier career. Like that was... Aside from trying to hit one reactive takedown that didn't go anywhere, he looked like exactly the older version of himself.
Yeah.
And especially what really concerned me was that he was pushing his punches again. He wasn't turning his hip over at all when he threw. And I don't know if he was just scared of the counter left or the distance was a problem for him, which are possibilities. He just was not extending his punches at all. So he kept coming up short when he would try to rush in. So that meant that he was like throwing himself forward to try to cover distance instead of playing with distance and range.
Yeah, well, you know how like Luke was like an okay boxer until Romero did something that like forced him into that same place mentally where suddenly he was Luke Rockhold again. Suddenly the pressure was on and he reacted the same way he's always reacted. It's like that happened to Donald Cerrone for the duration of the Darren Till fight. And my best guess is that it was a combination of the pressure. Darren Till put a lot of pressure on Donald Cerrone, which even now is still something we know that gives him problems. He's adapted to it and found other ways of solving it, but Darren Till put a lot of pressure on him, and Darren Till has a lot of reach. He's very tall and has very long arms, And Cerrone is still, I think, his style is built around being the long range guy in the matchup, being the longer, taller fighter. But those factors were enough to make him like the Donald Cerrone who lost to Nate Diaz. That's kind of what he looked like. He really, really looked like a regressed version. And Yancy Medeiros does not have the cleverness of Darren Till, but he has even longer arms. So I'm a little concerned here. I'm still going with Donald Cerrone as my pick. I think that Yancy Medeiros is just too defensively vulnerable, and I don't think he maybe realizes that he will need to come forward to have a similar effect on Donald Cerrone. I don't think he has it in his head that he is a pressure fighter and will be more willing to sort of start slow the way Cerrone does and give them some space to work in the beginning. And if he does that, Cerrone's kicking game should still be a pretty sizable advantage from long range. But if Medeiros sees this as his opportunity, if he is latched onto that narrative and decides to do what Darren Till did, seize the opportunity and come out really aggressive and push Cerrone around, I would not be shocked if he got a similar result to Darren Till, just because I think he hits hard, has long arms, and I don't know. I don't think Cerrone's given himself enough time to recover from what is undeniably the worst stretch of his career.
Yeah. I too am taking Cerrone. I think that if he's at anything close to his previous forms, then he should be able to take Medeiros apart. I think he's going to get hit more than he wants to get hit in this fight. If his chin can take it, if he can deal with eating some real sharp, snappy punches, then I think he should be fine. I think he should be all right. I would expect, maybe a finish, like a head kick finish, seems like the most likely outcome of this fight to me.
Hurt the liver, then go upstairs. That's kind of what I'm feeling.
Or just finishing him with a liver shot also is a possibility. It's hard to feel too certain about Cerrone these days, but it's a fight he should win. I think the matchup suits him.
Yeah.
So, but if we're at the point with Cerrone, we may be, where even a matchup that kind of suits him is still pretty dangerous, then, man, I don't know. I mean, we've been waiting for this for a long time. He's been a pro for 11, 12 years. He's had a lot of mileage, a lot of fights. It would not at all be surprising if this were just kind of the end of the road for him.
Yeah. But also, it wouldn't particularly surprise me if this kicks off another impressive run of 3 or 4 wins, and Donald Cerrone just somehow reignites his passion and starts to make small improvements again. I never know with Donald Cerrone.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah. All right. How about James Vick and Francisco Trinaldo? That's another fight happening on this card. To me, probably the second most interesting fight on the card. Listeners of the show will know I love Francisco Trinaldo, and listeners will probably also know that I wish I could say I loved James Vick. He still has that very unfortunate affiliation with Team Lloyd Irvin. If you don't know about the whole Lloyd Irvin saga, I encourage you to just Google Team Lloyd Irvin and maybe a few other words like rape, and you'll find some pretty disturbing things. But as a fighter, James Vick is very, very talented and becoming more and more skillful as time goes on. And his last fight against Joe Duffy was really his coming-of-age performance, where he seemed to put it all together in a way he never really had before against an elite opponent and got the finish as a result. So I'm pretty excited about this matchup, actually.
Yeah, it's a really, really fun fight. I think Trinaldo presents a lot of the same problems for Vick that the only guy to beat Vick in the UFC, Beneil Dariush, also did. Mm-hmm. Because he's a dangerous southpaw with pretty heavy hands who's going to walk you down. Trinaldo is not tall. In fact, he's very short. He's only 5'8", but he's a thick 5'8", and he's got really good kind of shuffling footwork. He makes it very hard to maintain a long range on him. And as we've seen from a whole bunch of different guys who have tried to keep a range on Trinaldo, they have not succeeded in doing it.
Yeah.
He does a good job of pawing and figuring out where you are relative to him. I would expect to see him hand fighting a lot with Vick and kind of catching Vick's attempts to jab on his gloves to gauge the distance and then coming back with kicks right away. Trinaldo's really well trained. He's very explosive and very fast. He's got a lot of pop in his hands. I think Vick is, and should be the favorite here, but I'm picking Trinaldo. I think he will tear up Vick's legs get inside, land big shots, force him back to the fence, maybe hit a takedown or two. But I kind of think this is just a bad matchup for Vic.
Yeah. I mean, I can see a scenario in which Trinaldo, how good has Vic's distance management gotten, I guess, is really the question, because it's looked dramatically improved. His jab is working now. He knows when to fire it. He doesn't overcommit to it. He can probe with it. He can snap it. There's a lot of flexibility to how his jab works. And as we saw when he set up the uppercut with the pawing jab against Joe Duffy, got him to duck under the pawing jab to see what was going on, just as he was sending an uppercut to meet his chin on the way down. He knows how to use that flexibility to his advantage. But Trinaldo's got a really good jab too. It's something I think I haven't talked about enough, even though I have shouted out Trinaldo's jab quite a bit, but it's a really big part of his success. And he also is very flexible in how he uses that lead hand. He likes the backhand jab a lot. He'll kind of just slap up at your guard from a lower position. He likes to paw. He can snap the jab off really nicely. And he throws it a lot to sort of line you up for the left hand. He's also, I think, continuing to expand the technique of what comes after that varied jab. Like, there were some really nice slips and counter combinations against Jim Miller. And Jim Miller is maybe not the hardest striker to predict in terms of like what he's going to throw at you, but Trinaldo did a phenomenal job after a hard first round against Jim Miller of adapting and just picking him apart in the pocket with combination punching. But Jim Miller is like Francisco Trinaldo's size. So trying the same thing, pulling off those slips and moving your head, if you lose track of range against a guy James Vick's size, then that can be really risky to rely on those nice little slips and rolls, because there's a reason fighters don't move their heads a lot at really long range, because you just get kicked in the head, right? You're not really, there's no reason to necessarily move your head like that unless you're closing the gap with that head movement or staying close enough to fire back. That's why you move your head rather than blocking or moving your feet, is so you can immediately fire back. And if you do that on the end of a long guy's reach, maybe you think you're in the pocket, but you're actually right on the end of his reach, you can get clocked. You know, like Vladimir Klitschko used to catch people like that all the time. They would slip his jab the way they would slip most heavyweights' jabs, and then be right on the end of the range of his right hand as they were moving their head, and he would just catch them before they could recover. So, I don't know. I think I favor Trinaldo. I think the kicking game is going to be a part of it, but I can also see Vic's boxing having another big moment here and catching Trinaldo when he doesn't quite realize what range he's at.
Vic should win this fight. Vic is a substantial favorite, and he should be. He's got a 7-inch height advantage and a substantial reach advantage. The game plan here should be for him to just stick and move his way to a decision against a much shorter fighter. I think the problem is, of all the guys who are kind of on Vic's level, which is to say fringe of the top 15, I just think Trinaldo is going to be very tough for him to deal with as he pushes his way inside. Joe Duffy was not comfortable pressuring. Joe Duffy is a guy who likes to stick at range. He likes to be at long distance. He likes to use his jab. He likes to fire that right hand down the pipe, throw the occasional kick, and then mix things up with takedowns. I still thought Duffy would win that fight because I thought he could do that against Vic, but it turns out the height difference was just too much. Trinaldo is not going to be under any illusions as to his ability to stick at long range with James Vick.
No.
He's not like, I think to beat Vic, you have to be willing to just walk through his reach, know that you're going to eat a few shots, but also know that you can counter him back. You can hit him back in that range and be just fine as you're pressuring. And I think Trinaldo was kind of suited to do that. So that's my pick.
I'm not concerned about him choosing to fight at long range, but more like moving forward, setting his feet to slip and getting stuck on the end of Vic's reach, by having to respond to Vic using his reach, he gives Vic the reactions he needs to capitalize. It's possible. I don't know. Vic is huge. I mean, Vic is Rockhold for this division. He's laughably bigger than most opponents.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very huge. Yeah. Like, just ridiculously large.
Oh, rooting for my boy Trinaldo, though. I love me some Masur Anduba. And I love all of you who are listening. Did I mention this is the Valentine's Day episode of Heavy Hands? That's when this is coming out. So a very happy Valentine's Day to all of you, to the 20% of our audience who will have a happy Valentine's Day. We hope it's a particularly happy one. For the rest of you, don't worry, there's 6 more weeks of interminable UFC fighting to keep your mind off of your loneliness. So we're glad that you all joined us here today. Before we wrap up, Pat, I'm going to give you a chance to plug. What do you have coming out this week?
I have a new episode of Tides of History talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. It's the last episode that I'm doing on the fall of the Roman Empire, which is why did the Roman Empire fall? And why does it still matter today, if indeed it does? You might be able to gauge that I do in fact think the fall of the Roman Empire matters, and I do think that it fell. And I have some thoughts as to why that was. So if that sounds interesting to you, check it out. Otherwise, I think that's all I'm doing this week. Just writing 2 new episodes of Tides of History and taking care of a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. And
yourself, what are you up to?
I don't know.
Stirring stuff, Connor. Stirring stuff.
Losing steam here at the end of the episode. Yeah, I'm working on something related to Rockhold Romero. I want to approach the question of, does Luke Rockhold really have a bad chin from a sort of a technical perspective, and look at how his chin factors into what he does in the cage, how he sometimes fails to protect it, and how the way that he chooses to protect it might make him a little more vulnerable than he would be otherwise. And then, of course, I will exhort the man to move up to 205 all throughout that article, because I really think that's the move for Luke Rockhold at this point. So that's probably what will be coming out from me this week, and not much else as far as I know. Thank you all for tuning in and listening to this episode of Heavy Hands. Support the show on Patreon. We are going to have recording this week coming up. I'm doing another historical perspective with Kyle MacLachlan, not the actor, the boxing historian, and a very charming man. So we're going to talk about some boxing history. I think our topic is going to be made for MMA, historical boxers whose games would have made them good candidates to be mixed martial artists down the line. So that's going to be a fun topic. And to hear that, you just have to subscribe for $3 a month to our Patreon to get that, all of our other bonus content, and the bi-monthly bonus episodes we put out. So check that out. Thank you again for listening. Find us on social media at BoxingBush. That's my handle, BUSCH. And Pat is on Twitter as well, at Patrick_Wyman. We're both on Facebook. Search our names. I'm tired of doing this at the end of every show. If you came here today for the Finer Points of Face Punch, and you came to the right place, this has been Heavy Hands.